Hey everyone, welcome to Seattle Cocktail Club's Brandy Week. Thank you so much for joining us for our second event of Brandy Week. I'm Amy, and before we get started, we've got a couple of cocktails that we're going to go through today. They're going to be super delicious. But before we get started, I want you to know that we're going to be doing a Q&A a little bit throughout this, but primarily at the end of this presentation. So if you have questions that come up along the way, please add them to the chat. We want to answer your questions. It's the whole purpose of this. It's not just drinking, it's also learning more about brandy and celebrating all things brandy. So to get started, I want to introduce you to the Northwest manager for Ferrand, also a friend of mine. His name is Jim Romdall. Hey, Jim, welcome.
Hello.
To the stream. And I'm going to let you take it from here because you are the expert in this. And I actually am really excited to learn more about brandy myself.
Hi, everybody. I don't get to see anybody. It's just always, I feel like I'm talking in the void, but I know you're there. My name is Jim. I've been a long time restaurant and bar owner and manager in Seattle. In the last 4 years or so, I was working for Novo Fogo Cachaça. And starting next week, I am the Northwest manager for Ferrand. I'm very excited. I'm not officially an employee, so anything I say on this, you can't hold that liable to the company because I'm not an official employee until next week. But here I am representing him. My boss, I believe, is tuning in, and he'll call me and yell at me for the things I said wrong because I have not been trained yet. So I'm just sort of winging it. Like I said, so this is really fun for me. I love brandy. I like working with brandy. As Ferrand is a company, we make cognac. We make Grand Champagne cognac. We also make Citadel gin, as well as we produce plantation rum and the Mathilde liqueurs, as well as the Pierre Ferrand dry curacao. We do a lot of fun stuff, and it's all very delicious. But here we are. Brandy Week is very fun. I think brandy doesn't get a lot of love. Just because it's just kind of like fallen out a little bit. So what's fun is that the history of brandy and cocktails is massive. So back in I'd say the mid 1800s, back when cocktails were first becoming a thing, right? Before that, everyone just drank straight spirits. Punch was a thing that was kind of consumed. Realistically, the first time citrus was ever used was like on ships. Basically, officers and pirate ships, they would have grog. The citrus was there to stave off scurvy. And so the first time really citrus comes into play in actually cocktail making was really in the mid 1800s. And that's when all of the old cocktails kind of came to be. And when that was the era, it was, I would say the first cocktail books that came out, a third of the recipes were all made with brandy. And that's because there were only three spirits you mixed with. It was gin, whiskey, and brandy. There really wasn't anything else too much available. Rum was huge in the late 1700s and early 1800s, mostly consumed straight. But by the mid 1800s in the US, we were making a lot of whiskey. And basically all the rum drinkers turned into whiskey drinkers. We stopped getting as much molasses and rum from the islands as we just started making our own whiskey out of mostly rye, because it was cheaper than bringing in molasses from the Caribbean. But brandy was prized, and especially cognac was a prized commodity. And we brought that over. There were making brandy in the US, but French cognac, which is what we make, was very prized. It was very, very popular. In fact, the first cocktail in the world, that was kind of the first thing to be called a cocktail, is the Sazerac. And that was originally, most people know that as typically a rye-based drink, but the original was made with cognac. It wasn't until the late 1800s that it started becoming more of a rye-based drink, where we started shifting more into whiskey drinkers instead of cognac. Cognac remained being a big staple in classic cocktails. Throughout Prohibition, cognac was again used a whole lot, used in a lot of recipes. And then post-Prohibition, it fell a little bit away. And then in the dead era of cocktails, I would call, which is like the 60s to the late 90s, it turned into more of like a sipping spirit. And now it's getting some little bit of a revival, but there's just so much out there that I think brandy doesn't get enough love on cocktail menus, and it doesn't get enough love in people's cocktails. So here we are, we're going to learn that. So the first thing I thought of when we were going to do this class really was doing a sidecar. A sidecar is just this very classic brandy-based cocktail. It's 3 ingredients. It's simple proportions. It's your basic sour, and we're going to make that. But what I thought would be really fun is you have the option in your kit. We can also make a drink called a Crusta. Now, the Brandy Crusta is a very fun drink. It's very unique in its proportions and the way it's made and the ingredients. But the reality is, it is to my knowledge, the first cocktail to be written down in a recipe that included citrus. So it's actually the grandparent. It's the parent to the sidecar, but it's the grandparent to almost all sours. It's one of the first drinks, again, aside from punch, the first cocktail, because cocktails at that point had bitters in them, to really include any sort of citrus. It's also very unique in the aspect it includes very little citrus. I know very few cocktails in all of the classic cocktail world that have such a small amount of citrus. It makes it a really fun cocktail. It's also this strange, garish presentation of a cocktail. If you look it up in the old books, it's this very lengthy explanation about the garnish and how to make it and do these things. And we're not going to do all of that today because it's kind of silly. And so we're going to make both of these cocktails. You can choose which one you want to make. The sidecar is your classic brandy, orange liqueur, which is our Pierre Ferrand dry curacao, lemon juice. That's it. It's very common to have a sugar rim on it. We can do a sugar rim. That kind of comes from the Crusta. You could do a sugar rim. You don't have to. I wasn't going to do it, but then the Crusta I kind of have to because it's kind of named after the sugar rim it has. So I can't make a Crusta without sugar rimming it. Whereas the Crusta is a little more complicated and requires a little more fine-tuned ingredients, so you can decide which one to make. It's really like a mix between an old-fashioned and a sour. And so we're going to make both of them. I'm going to make both, and you can choose which one you want to make, or you can just watch and make them later.
Jim,
yeah.
Do you have any recommendations because they're in their kits, they have the supplies to make one or the other, correct?
Yep.
So if they tend to like one thing over another, which direction they should go? Do you have any guidance on?
I would say if you like sours, if you like citrus-based drinks, make the sidecar. And if you like more spirituous drinks that are more spirit-heavy, more like old fashions, I would make the Crusta.
Cool. Thanks.
And so we're going to be using the Pierre Ferrand Ambre. Right, that's the one I got right here. Yes, it is. So we make Grand Champagne cognac. It's the smallest region, the very center of cognac. It's the most prized region for making cognac because of the soil. It's the most prized and highest end of the juice you make to make cognac. And this cognac, the Amber, for ours, it's the equivalent of an XO. The years of the blended go in this is a blend to be a 10-year cognac, and it is equivalent of an XO. We just call it our Premier Grand Cru. It's very delicious to drink on its own, and it makes a wonderful cocktail. It's going to be very soft. It uses 10% of Colombard grapes, which are really floral grape, which is a little more delicate grape to grow, as well as a lot of Uni Blanc grape, which is the most common grape for cognac. But that brings this big, bright floral quality to this cognac that I love. So for the sidecar, actually for both of them, we're going to mix 1.5 ounces of the cognac. So we're going to be shaking both these drinks. You can...
If you're wondering at home, it's the bottle labeled 1.5.
1.5.
For ounces.
Now, both of these drinks call for an orange liqueur. We're going to use this is our dry curacao. This is basically a very complex spirit. They kind of dug this up from old recipes to make the spirit is very cognac based. It's used as a separate distillation method between the spices, the rind of the orange, as well as blending it with brandies. And really, this is something you can consume on its own. This is the example of, if you want just orange flavoring, that's not this. This is a drink that's going to taste like orange, and it's going to taste like brandy, and it's going to have floral components. On its own, it's practically a cocktail. You have a little extra. You can just take a tiny sip if you want. Always take a tiny sip of everything, right? So for our sidecar, we're going to be using a full 3/4 ounce of this guy. And for our Crusta, we're going to be using a tiny 1/4 ounce of this. And this is where we get our first big difference of ingredients. While a sidecar is just like a very simple sour, our Crusta is going to get really complicated with a small amount of more ingredients. They're both going to get lemon juice. The sidecar, like a traditional sour, typically the sidecar calls for 3/4 ounce of lemon juice, or whatever your equal part of your curacao is. Our curacao is not as sweet as a lot of the other ones, so I actually lowered this down to a 1/2 ounce. You could also do 3/4 ounce and add a little bit of sugar to balance it out, but it's a little bit almost too dry of a drink if we're doing the full 2 to 1 to 1 ratio. So I'm just going to add a 1/2 ounce of lemon juice to the sidecar. And again, we're going to add just a 1/4 ounce of lemon juice to the Crusta. This is fun for me because, like I said, the Crusta is one of the only drinks I know of that is a drink that includes just a 1/4 ounce. One of the only ones. The other one is a French 75. That's just a scant amount of lemon juice. But that's common because it goes with champagne because it's supposed to be more of a champagne drink. But the Crusta, it's such a small amount of lemon juice to put in there. There are even a lot of recipes that just call for a small bar spoon of lemon juice. Now our sidecar is basically done. We're going to set that aside for a minute. Our Crusta is going to get a little bit of sugar to balance that out. And so I'm doing like 1.5 teaspoons of sugar in there. And now in a bar environment, we typically would be using like a simple syrup because it incorporates faster. There's really no difference between using sugar and using a simple syrup. It's much easier to use a simple syrup. You don't need like heat or anything to break down sugar. If you mix it with straight just booze, it has a harder time dissolving. But I'm just giving it a tiny stir. You can stir it with a spoon. You can stir it whatever you have. Eventually it will just dissolve on its own. I'm even using like an organic sugar that has bigger crystals, and it'll still break down. It just takes a little more effort. It's just harder to do it at speed.
Jim, a couple of questions, because I think with making both of them at the same time, we've lost a couple of people.
All right.
So let's recap where we are at this moment.
We got it. So our sidecar, which I've got in here, is 1.5 ounces, which is your little 1.5 ounce vial of the Pierre Ambre. 3/4 ounce of the dry curacao, and then 1/2 ounce of lemon juice. If you're making our Crusta, in here we have, I don't know, I was swirling around the sidecar like I had sugar dissolve in it. I didn't need to do that. And here we have our same base, 1.5 ounces of the cognac, 1/4 ounce, just 1/4 ounce of the curacao. You'll have a little bit more left over. 1/4 ounce of lemon juice, and about 1.5 teaspoons of sugar. Now that that's a little bit dissolved, and now we're going to add bitters to our Crusta. So I'm using a little pipette here. This will take a little bit of trial and error. For this guy, I call for 1 dash of bitters, but a dash of bitters is even a very like loose term. It's a term that's used in all recipes practically. But a dash from a full bottle, typically when you talk about a dash, we're talking about a bottle of like Angostura. Typically it has a little dasher top, a little hole in the top. But a dash from a full bottle is probably like 1/3 as much as a dash from the middle of the bottle. Because of the way it comes out of that dasher, very little comes out of the beginning and a lot at the end. If you're using you can get little Japanese dasher bottles that are very consistent with each dash. And if a typical dash, as we would term in the bartending world, is like 5 of those dashes, because those dashes are tiny. And so it's hard to tell somebody like a dash. So this is great because so I'm going to say about 1/3 of this little pipette is about a dash of bitters in my world of what a dash is.
That seems like a lot.
It looks like a lot in this. It's really, it looks like these little pipettes are pretty skinny. I measured this out. I played with it. So yeah, about 1/3 of that, and then put it into our. If you're making the Crusta, if you're not making the Crusta, don't put any bitters in your sidecar. Now, these are essentially ready to go. I won't put ice on them yet because now we're going to sugar our glass. To rim a glass with sugar. Now we're going to use the orange in the next cocktail, so I figure we just have our orange out. But our orange is to get sugar to stick. This might be one of those ones where I didn't get a bowl. So I've got a little bowl of sugar, and I've got my glass to work on here. So this is going to be my sidecar glass. Again, you can use any glass you want. Really, like a sidecar is traditionally something that is served up. A Crusta goes in just a myriad of glassware. A Crusta is oftentimes served in a short glass. I saw traditionally it was served in a very small wine glass, almost like a port glass. And I'll show you in a minute why, because it has a very specific, strange garnish that I didn't include in the instructions, and I don't expect you to do because it's weird and silly.
Hey, Jim.
Oh, yeah.
We've got some people that are catching up. Okay. So let's chat a little bit about, if you know anything about the history of it, or what fun facts do you have about the cocktails that are being made, or brandy in general?
One of the fun things about the Crusta and the sidecar is they're pretty much the parents to the margarita. they were the first ones I know of to do a sugar rim and then basically that became a sugar rim on the sidecar, which is essentially a sour, and then a margarita is essentially became the tequila sour with the salt on the rim. Really, every drink with citrus in it mostly stems from the Brandy Crusta. It's really it's that far, it's that iconic in its history of making that cocktail, and it came out at that time so early of using citrus in a cocktail. And back then, cocktails were, I mean, so people drank a lot more back then, which seems hard to believe because we're here in a group with talking about cocktails and we're enthusiasts and it's my job and we like alcohol. But the general public back in the 1800s drank a lot. Like the term cocktail, which we just generally use as a term for all drinks, was a specific drink. Back then, a cocktail had to have bitters. And the reason why it had bitters is bitters were sort of like a cure-all. Basically, every ad for bitters back then was like, it cures cancer, it cures warts, it cures STDs, it cures everything. And so you had bitters, but also, of course, it was supposed to cure hangovers. So a cocktail was typically something you had in the morning. You would just throw bitters in with sugar, and you'd throw a bunch of alcohol in it, and you would just down it. It was a breakfast cocktail. It's what you had on your way out the door going to work. You wouldn't
I like
eat.
that you said had as in past tense. Some people still do that.
Yeah, right? But they did this every day. It's like you sling back. I mean, like it's the reason for prohibition was slightly justified. We were just a big drunk society that it was very problematic. And most people, again, back then just drank spirits. Cocktails were for rich people. Cocktails was just this very high society, and that's they became very kind of outlandish, and they became very complicated. And the celebrity bartenders of the day were very celebrated people. They were very wealthy because that's who they served, and they had to make these spectacles of drinks. And so, like I said, the Crusta, which really kind of became the sidecar, is the grandparent to almost every drink with citrus in it.
That's super cool. Can we recap? Like, let's just do the Crusta and recap where we are with that, and then the sidecar and where we are with that, so everybody's up to speed.
I'm going to sugar rim the Crusta. So there's my like a sugar rim. So the Crusta, it's named after the fact that it has this giant crust of sugar all over the rim, which I find to be ridiculous, but I'm going to do it. And really, traditionally, the place, the Jewel of the South, the bar where this was created in New Orleans, they would do this like hours ahead of time, so the sugar just sort of like hardened and dried in the glass. So you take any citrus you want. Since we have an orange in your kit, I just sliced open the orange, do it, and you just wipe the outside of the glass. And I try to stay a little bit shallow of the top of the rim because it makes it a little prettier if you don't get any sugar on the inside. So I'm just swiping the outside here, but I'm doing a pretty wide swath. See, I'm really wiping the top of like half of the glass here. And then I'm taking my bowl of sugar and I'm really just laying it in there all around. See this big area of sugar. And this is where the Crusta gets its name. And this is like really a lot of show. This is the spectacle drink. Now, the next thing that the Crusta did, which I won't have, you can if you want. I have a lemon here. It gets this like giant, crazy lemon peel garnish. So you actually, the idea is you do like a half of a lemon, and you want to take almost the whole peel in one go. Go all the way around. Like this guy, you make this giant peel and you circle it around. And I have this kind of thin zester. And back then, because you had this little, like you did in the wine glass, you'd actually make almost a taller rim of the glass out of the lemon peel. It would sit here like this. So see, it's like out of the glass. And again, this is super obnoxious and silly, and you can't drink out of it. I think it's dumb. But this is what they did. This is like you had to make a show out of every cocktail there. For my sidecar glass, I'm going to do a slight. I like to just kind of sugar half the rim especially if I'm serving cocktails to guests, because it gives you the option. You can, or same with salt and margarita, unless you really like salt and you want salt. I always just do half. It's easy. You just go along one half of the edge. It gives you the choice. And you just lay your glass nicely into the sugar. You have a slightly elegant rim on half the glass.
So with the crusta, were they served the cocktail and then they immediately just took the lemon out?
That is a good question. I assume they kind of like pushed the lemon in to drink out of it. But if you look at the old cocktail books, it's like the first cocktail book, Jerry Thomas's drink book. I think the Brandy Crusta might have the longest description of how to make the drink out of any drink. It's like a huge paragraph on how to prepare the glass, how to cut the lemon, how to put it in the glass. It's very complicated. I think even more than like the Blue Blazer, which is one of his iconic drinks where the drink is lit on fire and passed back and forth with mugs. Uh-huh. Even the Brandy Crusta has even a lengthier description of that. One other thing about the Brandy Crusta, and this is one of the things I like. This is also my like, go out and drink more brandy. The Brandy Crusta is a very cool drink for the right bartenders. It's the type of drink where people never have it on their menus. Most bartenders who've been around for a while know how to make it, and it's the type of drink when you order at a bar, as long as the bartender's like a good bartender and likes talking to people and making drinks, as they should, but don't always. It's the type of drink where they're going to be excited to make it. It's one of those drinks that like if someone came in and they sat at my bar and they're like, "Can I get a Brandy Crusta?" I'd be like, "I haven't made a Brandy Crusta in like 2 years. That's awesome. Can't wait to make this drink." It's a very more about them than classic cocktails. You're not walking in and being like, "Can I get a Deschler?" or "Can I get an arsenic and old lace?" These like kind of slightly obscure Renaissance cocktails that are delicious. There's not an insult to those drinks. But it's a Crusta is a more simple drink because you kind of base off of it. And it's because like the Deschler and things, those things you're like, "Oh God, I don't know how to make that." I'm like, "Sure, I'll get that for you." And I go over this way and I look it up on my phone in the back real quick. And I come back and I act like I just got something for it, which is what we all do as bartenders. I don't think we make a show of it. We just don't remember how to make those drinks. But a Crusta is one of those ones kind of in a repertoire because it's a basic sour with reduced ingredients and a little bit of bitters. And so I think a lot of bartenders that have been around for a while, they won't have to go look up what a Crusta is. They might do it anyway because they might second guess themselves. A lot of those old recipes also call for a little bit of maraschino in the Crusta. Easy to do. It's classic ingredient. I like it without. I think it's a very simple cocktail with that. How are we doing on people? Are people caught up? Make sure I know which one's which.
I'm talking without the microphone on. Yes, I think that we are caught up. Let's just make a little bit of a pause after each step as a request from the chat.
All right. So we're adding ice. Both of these drinks are shaken. So we're adding ice. This is my sidecar.
And one of the things I think that we didn't mention as we were getting started is with this first cocktail that you're making, you have your choice of the sidecar or the Crusta. There is actually one more cocktail that we're going to make after this, which that cocktail is going to use the bottle with the 2 on it. So you shouldn't be touching the bottle with the 2 on it at this point.
Here we go. We're shaking. Like I said, I'm shaking away from the mic because we're trying to pick up the ice. Easy shake. Nothing wild required. There's a lot of hopefully we're past the debate of like how complicated shakes are and how complicated things are about ice. Ice is ice, and shaking a cocktail is the same thing whether you do it one way or the other. But we are going to strain it off. We don't want the ice in there. You can fine strain it. You don't have to fine strain it. My fine strainer is actually almost like too fine. Hopefully it's still going to work well. There's our sidecar. And we shake our Crusta. Again, you never have to shake drinks that hard. I mean, it's great for show, and sometimes you do it for speed, but that's all it needs. It does the same thing, whether you like shake it really hard or for a long time or in a weird special pattern or anything like that. It does the same thing. I'm not even find that this is my Cresta. Perfect. Those are these two cocktails. I'm going to taste this cocktails. Sidecars, both of these drinks are going to have like full forward cognac flavor, which is great. It's what we want, especially when you're using very nice cognac. Like the Cresta has like a special place in my heart. It's one of those drinks where, again, I haven't had one of these in a long time, except for the other night when I practiced making this for this shoot. It's a delicious drink because it really does. I love bitters in drinks. I think a lot of people do, especially around the Northwest. I like citrus in cocktails, but I can't do like huge, heavy, big citrus drinks, or at least I can only do one of them for a while. And this has just that amount of flavor. It's really like kind of soft drink, and it's very cognac forward, as it really should be. It's really almost like you're combining a sour and an old fashioned.
So if you're at home, tell me what you made in the chat and
Curious.
let me know your thoughts.
Yeah, I want a tally of who made a sidecar, who made a Cresta.
So that said, earlier this week we did kind of a basics of brandy, and it was focused more on American brandy because we did it with a company that.
Oh, interesting. That's American good to know.
Brandy. So, can you give us a little bit of like background on cognac and what makes your products your products?
So cognac, like many French things, is controlled and comes from the Cognac region in France. This is where my boss will slaughter me. Beyond that, it's a French brandy. Now, one of the things that makes cognac unique and what makes cognac a prized brandy throughout the world and always has been is French love rules. They love rules and regulations, and for good reason, because they create a standard and they want to protect that standard. They're pretty much anything French, especially in the alcohol world and beyond. You're going to find massive restrictions and rules on how it's made, and that's a good thing when you make good stuff. Like they've even changed the law, so everything it has to come from the Cognac region of France. Everything where our chateau and our vineyards are located, it was within Grand Champagne, which is so here's like the Cognac region of France, and then like Grand Champagne region is this tiny little circle right in the middle, and it is prized. And each region has kind of a different soil composite, and the different brandies that they produce, or the different cognacs that they produce, are different stylistically based on their kind of soil composition. But Grand Champagne cognac, which is all of our cognacs are Grand Champagne cognacs, that's where we're located, is considered to be the most prized fruit because it's the best region for growing cognac grapes, which are predominantly, most you'll find is Uni Blanc grapes. Ours are both of these cognacs we have are 90% Uni Blanc and 10% Colombard. So the Colombard is more of a rare grape. There's several other grapes that are allowed to be used in cognac, but it's predominantly Uni Blanc that is used in most cognacs. The different terms you see on bottles, it's funny, you think like the VS, VSOP. So VS is just one of them is very special and one of them is very superior. Very, very special is VS. It's really technical terms. As I just told you, there are a lot of rules. It's a very technical term, very special. VSOP is very superior old pale. And then XO is extra old. There are a lot of other terms in other brandies of France that are different. They have like a star system, and they typically refer to years, minimum years of age. They're always a blend, or they're most of the time, unless you get a vintage cognac, they're almost always a blend of many years. The blending of cognacs is a very like ancient art. It's one of the things kind of unique to the brandy world as a whole is the blending techniques that are used. So blending, most of the time in spirits, there's a lot of different terms for this. You mingle them a lot of times. If you're making a bourbon, you do like one big dump, and all you dump like the big companies will dump like 10,000 barrels that day, and that's their bourbon. Whereas the small companies will just be like single barrel, and it's one barrel that produces that batch of bourbon. Whereas cognac is almost always like taking samples that are aged in the cellars and blending them all together. There'll be many barrels, and the art of blending is like it's like another whole job when it comes into the cognac world. You have your distiller and you have your blender, and sometimes they're the same. In our case, like our master blender, but the being a blender is more of a higher term in the cognac world because they're the ones who really, it's their art and it's their palate that creates that product. So take spirit. So like everything is like VS, VSOP, XO. Those are basically like minimum age limits. And like basically, it's we don't label those on ours because we go after the specific, basically the taste of the blend. But ours is an XO. The Amber is an XO, designed to be a blend of around 10 years old, and it matches that blend. We don't label it XO. Sometimes that's a marketing label that benefits you. Sometimes we just want to ride on our own merits of what it tastes like.
With the blending process, does that lead to a lot of variation?
Well, ideally not. Ideally, that's the master blender's job, is when you have a stable product, that master blender, that is their job, to just make consistency, because people want that consistency. And then you see a lot of that also really in like the Scotch world. They strive after consistency. In the American whiskey world, a consistency isn't that hard because it always has to be in a brand new barrel. And so what they're getting, the char level they're getting, they know that on the big companies, they know that this floor 4 of this warehouse produces this bourbon that they make. That's why you have big American whiskey distilleries, like for example, like Buffalo Trace has like 80 brands of bourbon. And they're all very different, but it's made out of one distillate. It's just a matter of where you age it. But they know based on where it ages what the flavor profile is going to be. And sometimes they're like, all right, take the barrels from the 8th floor and mix them with the barrels of the 1st floor to make X bourbon.
Right.
Whereas in cognac making, it varies so much. And again, you kind of get to Scotch making because they reuse barrels. They use different types of barrels, and they use X sherry barrels. They use new oak. They use reused oak, and so that becomes a blending aspect for Scotch. But in cognac, the blending is even more complicated because you're using such a huge variance of years, because what they're trying to do is create a really complex spirit. And so a lot of times the bottle will have just 1% of a 30-year cognac. It'll even have really high-aged cognacs that taste terrible on their own because they're just so saturated with wood over time. But adding those little drops of that cognac into that blend really brings out the other younger vintages. So the art of blending.
Oh, sorry. Whenever we talk about blending, I think of when I was a kid, and we probably all did this as kids, and you'd get this soda machine where you got to fill your own cup, and you would make this like, I'm going to mix all the flavors and make the best thing ever. And obviously it had some goodness to us. Maybe it was a control thing, but like at one point we liked it, but we always had the one that was like, this wasn't so good. And it was really hard to figure out what that mix is. I can't imagine doing it with cognac or whiskey or Scotch and like.
Neither could I. Like the reality is in my world of mixing drinks and things like that, I have zero capabilities of making a blend like that. The intricacies that go into specifically like cognac blending is something that is way beyond my skill set, and that is something that masters do. That's why it's a very like prized. They're a very like highly sought after and highly regarded person is the blender.
I am looking at the chat, and it looks like there's a few sidecars in there, but I think the Crusta was the most popular mix tonight. So,
are people liking it? We get the little chats of thumbs up.
I've got some liked it. Nice balance. A yum, delicious. A couple of yums actually. So
good. Get out there and order more Crustas. Like hopefully bartenders love it. There's a little bit of like I think bartenders should love any drink, especially a drink they have. Like for me as a bartender, any drink I haven't made in a while is exciting to me. If it's a drink I know how to make and I haven't made in a while, like see like someone orders it, or I see a ticket pop up with that, I'm like, that's cool, fun. But sometimes bartenders are uppity little jerks, and they're like, oh, why can't they just order the thing I make 10,000 of? It's dumb.
I also think it's insane how much you know about Brandy and this company, considering you haven't actually started working there yet.
We'll see how much I get correct when my boss calls me after this.
Okay. We'll send out a corrections email.
Right.
If something's way off.
I'm pretty good. I like Brandy. And I have a long time relationship with this company. They've been like family. They've always been like family to me. I worked with them very closely when I ran as Rumba. because obviously we liked Plantation a lot. So I've been out to the chateau in France with them. So I've gotten to visit there. I've gotten to go in the cellars. It's a wonderful experience, and I'm lucky to be a part of the family officially. And so I think I've got a good base knowledge to go into this. But I will say that as far as like categories of spirits go, brandy is. I had to brush up a little bit for this because it was not an easy sell. Brandy cocktails, yeah, but like some histories I had to refresh because we don't talk about brandy enough, right?
Right. I agree with that. Somebody mentioned that they're very interested in having a skilled bartender make a Crusta, and who knows how much better it would be. Do you have any recommendations for where they should go request
I mean, like
that?
any bar that's been around for a while, especially if you have a bartender who is who's getting old. Anyone in their like mid 30s and older should know what a crust is. I would say that there's definitely a younger generation that there's probably a lot of people who just never made one.
Right.
It's just one of those drinks where like it's not on menus. I'm sure there's a whole generation of bartenders who have never made a crusta before. But if you've been around a bit, if you've hung out at Zigzag and those places, like if you ever got into classic cocktails as a bartender, you've probably made a crusta or at least seen a crusta. So any bartender who's been around for a bit should know how to make a crusta well.
And someone's asking, they're saying that it's delicious, but they're curious, why sugar instead of simple syrup?
Realistically, they're exactly the same thing. The reason why, like, so some people, and we'll talk about this with the next drink, some people will definitely be a purist and argue that in like a drink like an old fashioned, it should have sugar. But there's no real reason behind that. There's the only reason why we use simple syrup is because it's faster and easier to incorporate. Like if you add sugar to cold ingredients, it's not going to incorporate very well. It's going to be grainy. If you don't fully incorporate it, we sat there and we kind of stirred it around a little bit to make sure the sugar dissolved. The drink's going to change as you're drinking it. To some people, especially for like an old fashioned, the purists want that. They want there to be a little bit of grit so that like the last sips are a little bit sweeter. There's a little bit of an aspect of that. There's a little bit of historical aspect of it's always been a sugar cube before. But the reality is they're exactly the same thing. The amount of water you're adding is so minute to make it a syrup. What you're really doing is making it an easier ingredient to work with.
Got it. And then somebody wanted to know, would it make much difference if they interchange the cognac or brandy in these cocktails?
For like another spirit or a different cognac?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, if you switch the cognac, it's going to switch the flavor profiles.
I can answer both. I mean, I think the reality is like we're using very good spirits to make drinks, and like the better the spirit you use, the better drink it's going to be. And so that's a nice aspect of doing this class, because if you go and order this at a bar, unless you request this cognac, which I would be grateful if you did, then you probably aren't getting it with this cognac, because it's a little out of the well cognac. I will say that when it comes to, if you look at a menu at a bar and you see a brandy cocktail, there's probably a lot of love that went into it, and it's probably a better bang for your buck cocktail, because it's probably not ordered as much because it's not as familiar to people. And if someone puts a brandy cocktail, it's kind of a no-brainer to just like throw whiskey and gin cocktails on menus and tequila drinks. But when you're like, all right, I'm going to make a brandy cocktail, I would say that generally most bartenders put a little more effort into it because it's not something they make every day. And so if you see a brandy cocktail or cognac cocktail on a menu, it is usually like there's a little more of a labor of love to it, because it's something a little more specific. If I was building a cocktail menu, I would build those drinks first, and I would fill in the whiskey ones because the whiskey ones are easier.
Makes sense.
And plus, they know it's not going to be ordered as much. The bars, if you don't know this is a smart bar. The most popular drinks are the ones you should make the most money on. So like your signature drink, you better be making the most money on that one. Usually the cognac drink is buried in like the kind of like the 2/3, 3/4 down the menu. That's the one you're usually making the least amount of money off of. Because usually if you're a good cocktail bar, you also care about the cognac you're using. And good cognac's not as cheap as generically passable gin that you put in drinks. Or like it's one of those things where usually, because it's not ordered as much, your well cognac or your well brandy is going to be higher quality and a little costlier than your well of other spirits that they pour a lot more of.
Got it. And then somebody said the orange that came in the box is delicious, but don't eat all of that orange.
We have to use the orange. We're about to.
All right.
Let's move on to that.
Let's do it.
So this drink, I'm excited about this because this drink's hilarious. So the old fashioned. This is where I would ask if I was interactive plays, like who loves old fashions? And everybody in the room will raise their hands because everybody loves old fashions, especially in the Northwest. I'd say it's probably the most called for drink in a bar. Now, the old fashioned has gone through massive variation throughout the years. Like I said, it started off again as a breakfast drink where we are just adding bitters. So the old fashioned wasn't necessarily a whiskey drink for one. It started off as a category of drink. And an old fashioned just meant water, spirit, bitter, sugar. That's what an old fashioned was. It didn't have to be whiskey. Later, it became the improved whiskey old fashioned cocktail. Like they became really awkward terms because it became more of a whiskey drink. That became the most common because that's just kind of what people drank was whiskey, especially with bitters. And so it became ubiquitous with being made with whiskey. And people don't know where the fruit came from. Really, kind of like sometimes the thought is that during Prohibition, there's a lot of fruit garnishes for drinks because you're chewing on them to cover up bad spirits. Because during Prohibition, they're just drinking a lot of bad booze. That's where really cocktails came from. A lot of cocktails came to be because you're trying to mask the flavor of bad alcohol that was being bootlegged in. But a lot of fruit was added to the top of it. And then, I don't know, no one seems to know why, but right around the 60s or so, people started muddling the fruit in old fashioned. An old fashioned became whiskey with muddled orange and cherry with bitters and sugar. You just smashed it all up in there. And then you added ice and soda water. And that was the old fashioned from about like the 60s until really about 2000 and almost into the mid aughts. And it became people who are into cocktails. It became like the barometer test for ordering a drink. Because you could go to a bowling alley and order an old fashioned, or you can go to a cocktail bar and order an old fashioned, and they would be very different drinks. We're talking like the mid 2000s to late aughts, where when people started caring about these things, you'd still like 2009, you still go anywhere order an old fashioned, and it might be this like soda water muddled fruit thing, or it might be the old fashioned, which I think now almost every bar makes today, which is a very simplistic drink of whiskey, sugar, bitters, and ice. I would venture that many people, unless you got into cocktails before that era, have only had what I would refer to as the classic old fashioned, which doesn't have any muddled fruit. And that is spread across the country. And that's been great because I love old fashions and they're delicious. But in Wisconsin, they say no. They say, screw that. That's not the way we make old fashions. And in Wisconsin, they make what is now just known as the Wisconsin old fashioned. They just call it an old fashioned, but it's now an actual official drink. It's the unofficial drink of the state of Wisconsin. Now, they just didn't. Now you can go to Wisconsin and they'll make classic old fashions, but the Wisconsin old fashioned is not made that way. And so for me, this is really fun because I'm going to use really good cognac and just completely bastardize it by making this cocktail, and it's still really delicious. So in Wisconsin, it's a brandy old fashioned, and the brandy they use almost solely throughout the state is Korbel brandy. They go through more Korbel brandy than they might be more than all the states combined. Now, I won't speak ill of other brands, I never will, but if you've ever had Korbel sparkling wine from California, your assumption that the brandy is of similar quality would be correct. That's all I'll say about that. So we're going to use the Pierrefonds 1840 for this. So the Pierrefonds 1840 is a cognac, also made with Uni Blanc with Colombard grapes. So this is a cognac that our master blender, he got this old bottle that's actually from 1840 of cognac, and he got to taste it, and he wanted to design a cognac around that spirit because that was the spirit really that they would have been using to make drinks with back in the mid 1800s. And so through all sorts of lab tests and through lots of tasting, lots of very expensive tasting for something that's 150 years old, this is a product that we made. And we just call it the Pierrefonds 1840. It's also Grand Champagne cognac. It is a little bit higher proof because that's also what they would have been really using at the time, which is also not that common in the cognac world. Most of the time, cognac will be just a straight 40%, whereas this is 45%, and that little 5% adds a lot. So this is really a recreation of what we believe cognac in really good cognac in the mid 1800s would have tasted like. It probably tastes a lot better just because realistically, as much as we romanticize the old era of booze making, the booze they drank back then was not good. Some of it probably was, but distillation is half art and half science. And they didn't back then. It was just all art. So some people, I'm sure, made great stuff. But today, we're living in a great era for making booze. So for this guy, we're gonna smash some fruit. It's gonna be great. So take a good slice of orange. I basically cut just a normal slice, not a big wedge like you're going to a kid's soccer game, but just a slice. Throw it in the glass. Now take your cherry. Throw your cherry in that glass too. Now take bitters. We're going to use, instead of a third of the amount, we're going to use about half of this guy, which measures about 2 dashes of bitters. And if you like old fashions with more bitters, use more bitters. Old fashioned's a very subjective drink. If you like it sweeter, you can add more sugar. If you like it with more bitters, add more bitters. I think this drink comes across well with 2 dashes of bitters, which is my little pipette half filled. Put that right in there. You'll have time to catch up. And we're going to put in about the same as before, about 1.5 teaspoons of sugar. So to read it with that, it's basically a slice of orange, a cherry, about half of your little pipette, and 1.5 teaspoons of sugar. And now we're just going to crush it. Just crush it all up. You can use anything. I have a muddler. If you don't have an actual muddler, because I didn't include one in the cocktail kit, you can just use a spoon to mash it up, and really just pulverize everything. The only thing, try to stay away from mashing up the actual rind of the orange, because that's going to add a little more bitter pith to it. So just want to mash up the fruit. And what we're doing here is not only that, we're kind of incorporating the bitters and the sugar together with the fruit. And I don't know our range of people drinking cocktails, but like I said, this is what every old fashioned was until probably 2007, 2006 is really when cocktail bars started existing. So prior to then, this was every old fashioned. No one in the country was making an old fashioned the way you get an old fashioned at a bar today. It was all this. And I started working at a college bar in 2000, and I'd had people order old fashions, and this is what you made. I had no one had any idea that it was anything else other than this. Oops, I just dropped my bitters. So you see, they're just mashed up in there. It's okay if they're still, you don't need the sugar to all dissolve yet, because we're gonna add some alcohol to it. But it's just a big slurry mess of fruit. And if you go to Wisconsin, everyone in Wisconsin knows what this drink is. It's just that's the state drink of Wisconsin. Even if you don't drink, you know what it is. They also I'm not going to do this because it's my preference. Someone from Wisconsin is going to be like, you didn't add this. So to this, we're really just going to add brandy and give it a quick stir. Add cognac, give it a quick stir, and the drink's done. But in Wisconsin, they will oftentimes either add sour mix or Sprite to the top of it. And that's just whether they want it sour or they want it sweet. Which I think is unnecessary. It's a good drink. Especially if you're using good cognac.
I've heard that in Wisconsin, the version that we're making is called Wisconsin Old Fashioned Neat. And there's the sweet and sour versions as well. And they don't garnish them with cheese because I asked.
This is a drink that I didn't even know about until not that long ago. It's really one of those it's just this weird black hole of this Wisconsin cocktail that really doesn't leave Wisconsin. If you ask anyone from Wisconsin, they'll know it. And you ask anyone from outside of Wisconsin, they've never heard of this.
Amazing.
And that's why, again, this is why I kind of find this fun. This is why I wanted to make this cocktail today, is because like cocktails should be fun. They shouldn't be super pretentious. They should be fun. Even when you're using like the best spirits possible, a cocktail should be a fun thing to make. And any cocktail, even like a crazy, silly bastardization of this, tastes delicious when you make it with good booze. And I think a lot of people who drink probably old fashioned is like their go-to drink. I think a lot of people these days have no idea that it went through this like multi-decade era of just being this strange drink with muddled fruit. And so this drink, I was very excited to make this because I think it's really fun. So to our mashed up fruit, we're just going to add 2 ounces of the Pierre Ferrand 1840.
Which is the bottle with the
label
2 on
2,
it.
which you can just dump in after you take a tiny sip of it, of course, because you should always take a sip of everything. And then I'm just going to give it like a quick stir without ice, just to get the sugar fully dissolved. And because it's an old fashioned make this, you can leave some of the sugar. It'll dissolve over time. And it's this kind of cloudy haze. And in Wisconsin, I know it's also traditional to like use kind of more like crushed ice. If you had like crushed ice to really kind of mix it up, but I don't have crushed ice. So we're just going to put ice in it.
Someone said, well, if you watched Mad Men.
Mad Men, they were consuming classic old fashions. I don't think they did. I guess sometimes you'd see like the orange in there probably in Mad Men.
Uh-huh.
But I think they kind of leaned towards the older era of cocktails just for that purpose. Because like if you show an old fashioned that has like fruit floating into it, if you had a drink on screen with like fruit floating in it, made like this, I think old Mad Men, they tried to lean towards the older drinks, because I know the show kind of blended. Didn't it hit 1970?
Melissa that posted the comment said yes, but I'm not sure what she said yes to. So
yeah, I think they stuck to like, obviously the drinks are also like fake of the show, so I think they stuck to like I think that the drinks they consumed on the show, if I remember, were like leaning towards the early era, even though it went to the later one. Because man, when 1970 hit, when that was, every drink had cream in it. It was either a vodka martini, like Johnny Walker Black on the rocks, or the drink was like orange juice and cream with stuff. It was like a weird flip flop of marketing dollars and like actual like drinks they made. If you find cocktail books from that era, they're hilarious. They're strange because it'll be like every drink has like an ounce of cream in it, which is just like so heavy and so strange. Yeah, Jello.
That was the
like
Jello
a lot
era.
of orange juice, a lot of cream. None of the drinks look appealing. There's no brandy in any of them, which is awful. So this is it. It's done. Like once you add ice to it, this is your Wisconsin old fashioned. And it's a good drink when you use good alcohol in it. Like good cognac makes this really delicious. It's really tasty.
I want to hear what you think at home. And if you have any questions at all about brandy, cognac, I think now's the time to ask. And somebody said that they made the second one out of their liquor cabinet. The prepackaged cognac was much better than our brandy cognac blend at home. So
thank you.
We will be sending out an email after this that tells you which one was which. And somebody says, we don't shake this one, right? That's correct. You're just going to...
Correct. Don't shake it. No need.
Okay.
We're not trying to... So shaking... So in the world of just generic cocktail 101, you basically, if it has actual citrus juice in it, you typically would shake it. So this, you could like kind of argue that maybe you would shake this. The reason why you shake a cocktail is you want aeration. So what ice does when it goes through a cocktail is that little tiny pieces of ice slice through the cocktail when you're shaking it at speed that creates tiny bubbles. That's aeration. And that kind of gives it like this kind of silkier, velvety mouthfeel that is great when you have citrus in drinks, specifically like lemon or lime juice. It's not so great when you don't have citrus because it kind of leaves it flat and limp. It will typically also dilute the cocktail about 25% more than stirring a drink. just because you're breaking up the ice into smaller bits and moving it at speed. And so for this, because this is really just like, it's really like more like a squeeze of orange and a little bit of cherry essence. I wouldn't call this a drink that has citrus in it per se. So I would not want to shake this, because it's shaking this, it would get it kind of frothy. But I think it would leave the drink a little bit limp, because I think it would kind of thin it out a bit.
Got it. And I see there's a comment in there. They prefer it. It's delicious, and they prefer it to an old fashioned with whiskey. Yeah. So I think it's
good on you. Isn't that tasty?
All right. So I'm not seeing any questions come in. But I did see this is my new favorite old fashioned. So that's a good sign.
There you go. I'm sorry to say, if you go to a bar and order a Wisconsin old fashioned, they might look at you blankly. It might be I would guess that most bartenders don't know what a Wisconsin old fashioned is, unless they're from the Midwest, or unless they're like they find it like this whimsical thing the way I do. No one's ever ordered one for me at a bar before.
Really?
Yeah, no one's ever come up and ordered a Wisconsin old fashioned to me. I've made brandy old fashions before. But no one's ever specifically asked for a Wisconsin old fashioned.
We should make this trend in Seattle.
You could try to make it. It would be funny to watch.
Bartender.
And you might get weird pushback from people because they'll do the thing like, "Sure, I'll get that for you," and then they walk over here with their phone and they look at what a Wisconsin old fashioned is over here off camera, and they come back and they're like, "Okay, I guess." And then they find an orange and they slice it out. This might be more of a like pain drink to make than it is like the Crusta. I think a fun bartender will have a great time with that one. Mm-hmm. Whereas this is one where you're just like, really, this is the drink you want? That drink sounds awful. Sounds like we're going backwards in time.
Right. So somebody asked, and this is on our end, can you put the recipes in the follow-up email? I believe they are already in there and ready to go. What other fruits are good to muddle if we're playing with the idea at home?
So muddling fruits, in my mind, muddling fruits is you're really trying to get what you're trying to get out of muddling fruit is both the juice, but you're trying to get a little bit of the oils out of it. Now, there are certain drinks where that really works well. Like a caipirinha is traditionally a muddled lime. To go in there, and I think that works well because of the sugar, because you want to get some of the lime oil out of the drink and like the kind of fresh spirits. Otherwise, I don't think muddling is that great. I don't think it's better than. I would much rather just use juice and control the amount, and then use the zest on the outside for aromatics than I would muddle an ingredient. I just don't. I honestly, if you want to make something consistently delicious where you know the quantity. Like orange doesn't add that much flavor, really. If you've like fresh orange juice, it's great on its own, but it falls super flat and limp when you mix it with spirits. It actually isn't a very good mixing ingredient. You'll see nowadays a lot of times bartenders will actually add citric acid or a little bit of lemon juice to their orange juice that they bottle because it'll stand up better in cocktails that way. Whereas just any drink that just calls for orange juice is a really like. Unless it's a mimosa, and that's not the same thing as standing up to spirits. Orange doesn't hold up well. So muddling an orange with like a brown spirit is easy because it really adds just a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of flavor, and it's really not going to mess it up that much. But you never know how much juice is going to come out of a piece of lemon. You don't know if it's going to be a lot or a little, and like a little amount of difference in a lemon or a lime is a huge difference on the way a drink tastes.
Absolutely.
So my answer is don't muddle.
Don't muddle. All right. I think we've answered all of the questions. Do you have any last minute advice for people making cocktails at home with Brandy? Oh, I see your cat's joined us on the call.
Has our cat joined us?
Moxie's on the other side.
Oh, there she is. Moxie. Now she won't shut up.
So any advice for
so the traditional brandy cocktails, a lot of times they were after dinner cocktails. Mm-hmm. Brandy itself and cognacs, they work really well with like rich ingredients. They work really well with chocolate. They work really well with dairy ingredients like holiday punches and things like that, where you're making kind of a milk punch is wonderful with brandy. Brandy should be in pretty much any punch. I always think if you like, rum is a lot of punch, but I think if you mix rum and brandy, it's really great together in a punch. I think all punch should include brandy. Eggnog should definitely have brandy in it. Anything that's kind of a rich drink that has a backbone, that's what cognac's going to add to it, because it has a fruit-based flavor without adding fruit. So anytime if you want something, a drink that is like I keep on using the example, punch. A punch is a drink where in my mind, it should be a complex drink, but you shouldn't be able to discern one thing from another. It's kind of like this crazy mixing bowl of too many ingredients. Whereas like a sidecar, you're like, I taste the cognac, I taste the lemon, I taste the orange liqueur. Whereas punch with more ingredients should have this more like melding of flavors. And cognac adds a different level of fruit flavors without adding citrus. So you're going to add citrus to it, and it's just another level of those layering of flavors.
If somebody wanted to pick up bottles of the things that they've tried today, where would they get them?
I would go to Downtown Spirits. It is usually good about carries a whole lot of our wonderful products, and they're good people.
Downtown Spirits will deliver to you in like an hour. So
they also will do that. They're great. They're my go-to in Seattle for getting these spirits.
Awesome. All right. Well, it looks like now all the comments coming in are to Moxie, so we probably don't have to answer those.
She's gone. She's skittish. She hates people.
Yes, and
she's a very cat, and the fact she likes us but hates everyone else.
She likes me. I've met Moxie before.
Sure. She's got now that we have kids, she likes other people better because at least those people are better than our children.
Oh, that's terrible.
She just realized that it can be worse. You're fine.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here with us tonight and sharing all these cocktails. It's looking like people are enjoying them quite a bit. We're going to let them go enjoy their cocktails. And I'd love to bring you back for a holiday cocktail cognac event type thing if you're up for it.
Absolutely. We can do a whole thing on eggnog. It'd be great.
Oh, I'm in. I'm so in. All right.
I'll do an eggnog versus coquito battle. It'll be really fun.
My mind is like, yes.
We just did it. Sold.
Yes. All right. Awesome. Thanks so much for being here. If you're watching at home, thank you so much for joining us. We have lots of great events coming up for Gin Week, which is our next week. It's not next week, but it's the next celebratory Spirits Week that we're doing. So please, by all means, check out our website, seattlecocktailclub.com. And again, thanks so much for being here, and we will see you soon. Cheers.
Cheers.